Hello chums, and welcome to the Fastest Lap series, where I'll be putting all of the road cars in Gran Turismo 7 to the test. Each car will be scrutinised in a few ways, once with no upgrades and comfort soft tyres, once with all upgrades and racing soft tyres, and once with an engine swap if the option is available. All cars are tested on a PlayStation 5 controller because I am an unsophisticated proletarian, and I drive each car with no driver assists except for ABS. I am by no means a professional, but I can usually complete a lap without binning my car into a wall, so hopefully I can do each car justice. The chosen test track is the Nurburgring Sprint course for its variety of corner types, along with a few longer straights to test every aspect of a car's performance. Let's see today's contender. As a quick recap, I started this series in summer of 2024, but the physics changes in July changed the game so dramatically that I would have to restart the entire series. With multiple physics changes since, it was just as well that I didn't bother. Now that things seem like they're hopefully in a more stable place, I've decided to restart the series. I did create an intro episode where I tested several race cars so that we have something to compare the road cars to, and I've since driven them and found very little difference to the lap times, despite all of the physics updates, so their times on the leaderboard will still stand. Right, enough of that nonsense, let's test some cars. Rather fittingly, our first road car is the Mazda Unos Roadster, known in America as the Miata and in Europe as the MX5. This could well have been your first car in Gran Turismo 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, and it was always the cheap choice for those who wanted to upgrade their car before even tackling their first race. In the real world, the MX5 appears to be driven by one of two people, those who modify it and those who don't. Those who don't judge those who do. Those who do have probably fitted some cheap coilovers, some Enki replica wheels, and have wired the pop-up headlights so they'll wink at people. The MX5 was designed as a spiritual successor to the classic British sports cars that were very popular in the 1950s and 1960s. Throughout the 1980s, Mazda toyed with the idea of a small sports car, experimenting with a front-wheel drive layout based on their 323 hatchback, a mid-engine layout to compete with the likes of the Toyota MR2 and Pontiac Fiero, as well as the classic front-engine rear-wheel drive layout that more faithfully harked back to the MGs and Triumphs that inspired the car in the first place. In terms of the styling, the Lotus Elan was a particularly strong inspiration for this concept. Despite initial skepticism, the front-engined rear-wheel drive prototype won Mazda's internal design competition. As the concept was refined, the squared-off rear end that resembled the Lotus Elan was rounded out into the design that you see today. During the entire process, simplicity was one of the top priorities, both in terms of the car's design as well as the car's usage. Anyone who's tried to put the soft top up on an MGB will know that it's a royal pain, but the MX-5's roof goes up or down in one single motion. Base models were so simple they were fitted with steel wheels, no stereo, and didn't even have power-assisted steering or brakes. Maintenance was simple too, until the rust came along. The design team chose to use a backbone chassis with holes cut into the central frame to save weight, similar once again to the Lotus Elan. Mazda used this because it was cheap to produce and simple to repair, when compared with the more common unibody construction, though it came at the cost of side impact protection. Not that a sub 1 ton bathtub on wheels was ever going to protect you much in the event of an accident anyway. Two engines were offered, a 1.6 litre 4-cylinder, and from 1994 onwards a 1.8 litre engine was added, which offered a whopping 15 horsepower or so over the smaller engine. Being an early model, this particular car has the lighter 1.6, with a rather pedestrian 117 horsepower. However, it makes up for it by weighing only 940 kilos, where the later 1.8 litre models with more creature comforts tip the scales at closer to 1 ton. So, let's see how close this car can get to the current last placed car on the leaderboard, the Maserati A6. Like all unmodified cars in this series, this car has no upgrades that affect the performance in any way, and it is fitted with Comfort Soft tyres. The reason all cars are fitted with Comfort Soft tyres is because they will give a very rough approximation of how the real-life car will perform on some fancy Michelin Pilot Sport tyres, which are some of the better summer tyres on the market, which are road-biased but can handle a track day. While the sports tyres would be faster, there aren't many cars on the street rolling around on Cup 2R tyres. In the real world, the MX5 is a fantastic car on a small windy road, but in the world of Gran Turismo with its wide open racetracks, the small Roadster finds itself rather underpowered. Thanks to its lack of a limited slip differential, the car is actually quite a mess to drive, and as a result is actually quite challenging to get the best out of. It's prone to lift-off oversteer, as well as the inside wheel spin, typical of cars with open differentials. Maintaining speed through a corner is more difficult than you might think, and in its own way it can actually be quite fun to try and extract everything the car has to offer. Fitting a customizable limited slip differential will smooth out the behaviour of this car, turning it into an absolute pleasure to drive. Without it, the MX5 manages a 1 minute 54.305, 7 seconds behind the 1954 Maserati. Let's see how it performs with some upgrades. Anyone who's been with the channel for any length of time won't be surprised that I've created a nostalgia livery for this car. The PlayStation 1 era Gran Turismo games featured pre-made racing modification sets for the majority of the road cars, resulting in some of the coolest looking retro race cars. A green car with a yellow stripe and red wheels probably shouldn't work, but for me, I love it. Unfortunately, there's no option for a hardtop in Gran Turismo 7, so I decided on a yellow roll cage in its absence. With all of the engine upgrades and a turbo, the Mazda makes a respectable 294 horsepower, which is about the same as a 1980s Porsche 911 Turbo. However, the Mazda weighs in at just over 800 kilograms, so it should be able to put in a more worthy performance than its unmodified counterpart. It's somewhat well known that Mazda had a unique approach when it comes to designing the MX5 in all of its generations. They refer to it as Jimba Itai, which I've probably butchered. To us, it means horse and rider as one, and it makes more sense on this upgraded car, which drives fantastically. The engine matches the chassis excellently, and revving to over 10,000 RPM, it sounds very nice too. With just under 300 horsepower, it's just about fast enough to be fun, while not being too powerful for its own good. The brakes and handling match up more or less perfectly, with almost no lift-off oversteer and very little power oversteer. It gets a time of 1 minute 29.643, very respectable when you consider that it matches the 500 horsepower Ford Mark IV race car. So, we just saw a horse and rider as one. What about if the horse has a ballistic missile stuck up its arse? As many will know, the Mazda MX-5 doesn't just stop at 300 horsepower, thanks to the addition of a 13B turbocharged rotary engine from its more athletic sibling, the RX-7. While this engine weighs 46 kilograms more, it more than makes up for it with almost exactly double the power. With a rotary engine, the only acceptable choice for a livery was of course the renowned livery from the Mazda 787B Group C car. So, with almost 600 horsepower, can the brakes and suspension still hold up? There's no doubt that this is a cool engine swap, but I would argue it's a tiny bit too much for this car to handle. In this series, I typically drive cars until I achieve a lap time that I feel does the car justice. The stock MX5 took roughly 8 laps, the upgraded car took 3 laps. This engine-swapped MX5 took nearly 20 laps, so hopefully that gives you an idea of how difficult it can be to get the best out of this car. It's entertaining to drive as a result, though not necessarily nice. There's no doubting its performance though, as it eventually managed a 1 minute 25.527. That time places the engine-swapped MX5 above the Honda NSX GT500 and the 600 horsepower Porsche 917K. And until more road cars are tested, the only thing that's faster is the F1 GTR, Sauber C9, the vacuum cleaner, and the McLaren MP44. Meanwhile, the upgraded car on its standard engine puts in a good showing, beating the Group B Peugeot 205 as well as the 500 horsepower Ford Mark IV, though it's a few tenths behind the Alfa Romeo 155 DTM. Unfortunately though, the unmodified MX5 is trailing the leaderboard in a lonely last place. We'll see how many cars go slower than that in due time though. And that was the first road car in the new Fastest Lap series. Tune in next time to see something slightly larger. If you have any requests for cars that you would like to see tested sooner, please comment down below. Thank you very much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful for your subscription. Take care now, and ta-ra!